summer house. It was the 300th year, an uncelebrated anniversary, forever etched into inanimate objects, yet remembered by no one. 3 turbulent centuries had passed. They had seen the summer house lying beneath its preserving cover of ivy and creeper, those 2 resolute plants that bargain for the privilege of crumbling buildings to the ground in their own time, whilst holding the weather at bay. Structures were built to last in those days. A hump of tangled greenery amidst a wilderness of plants once collected and tended by men, left running to seed so long ago now that they had reverted to their wild strains centuries before the human line in the manor house was just dust and clay. Smaller rises of foliage marked the outlines of the ruined walls of that proud house that had stood strong in the days of good Queen Bess. Since then, it had been made uninhabitable by the careless mishandling of gunpowder and some errant pipe ashes. All who held ownership of the manor perished. Nature moved in to claim her own. The grand old lady suffered occasional setbacks. A legal wrangle developed over the property and continued through several families until the deed of ownership was lost. Last seen fluttering down from the edge of London Bridge during a common street brawl. Then there was the time when a young man had taken refuge from his pursuers by hiding in the half-buried cellars. Armed soldiers had tramped through the gardens, smashing down plants with their heavy boots, slicing through years of carefully placed undergrowth with their swords. They even attempted to burn the place out, but nature wasn't going to release her hold that easily. A shower of rain extinguished the flames before their red greed ate up too much vegetation. The fugitive escaped, and to show his gratitude, he jammed the great gates shut with a thick branch, so that in time, they became an extension of the ivy-covered walls. No one else should disturb the peace of that hallowed ground which had hidden a true king. After that time, the human race ignored the secluded estate. Politics, wars, pestilence, and international crises proved more interesting subjects of concern. The Industrial Revolution passed it by. The densely packed woodland held no allure to the Victorian philanthropists. They were more interested in plucking human fruit from the branches of the looms and mines. Mother Earth built her palace within the high red brick walls that ringed the edge of the land. The ruins of the summer house were soon overrun with creeper, while the ivy, that debt collector amongst vines, began to cover every piece of stonework, growing slowly, but very surely, into a fine mantle over the centuries. For nearly a generation, the orchard retained its neat ranks. Inevitably, rebel fruit trees grew and blossomed from the fallen seeds. A ragtag army of pears, plums and apples marched its all-conquering way across the rose beds. Unperturbed by this intrusion, the perfumed thorns wound and twisted their way onto the lawn, that lush expanse of waving grasses, studded in spring with golden daffodils, became pierced in summer by scarlet poppies. Once neat shrubs and well-pruned trees lined oft-trodden paths. Now mighty oaks cast their majestic shade over many parts of the gardens, yet not one of these giants could boast of having cooled human skin. The last of the original trees had toppled a century ago, crashing down in a winter gale, smashing into the old wall as though attempting to break free from its home. Yet, not a brick moved. The thick cushion of ivy tendrils saw to that. The sun shone gently down on this May morning and caressed the hidden summer house with its warm rays. A single shaft of yellow light penetrated the ivy through a ragged hole torn last March by the falling weather vane in a spring gale. The golden beam illuminated the floating motes of dust as they rose and fell, a mist that sparkled with a myriad of tiny diamonds whenever it passed through the bar of daylight. A summer breeze wandered through the broken window, idly toying with the countless generations of birds' nests that covered the floor. The zephyr whispered through the greening leaves. It spoke of idyllic days yet to come. Delicately, the cobwebs wafted, as though trying to clean some of the dust from their densely intricate strands. A brief shadow flitted across the golden rod. The kestrel plummeted from an azure sky and snatched at a grey shape on the ground in front of a summer house. He flapped lazily to his nest in a clock tower, that crumbling, rotting place where time had stood still for eons. He fed the torn mouse to the one mewling, ever-hungry chick. It wobbled like an animated powder puff in the nest of grass and twigs. This was the latest in a long line of homes to replace the clock face. It was the first to be built when the disc of rusting enamel had finally surrendered to the inevitabilities of the medium it was meant to record. Wild animals were the only creatures who found their way into the walled enclosure, the diggers and the climbers. Passers-by of a humankind stayed well out in the road, intent on making their way to the nearest inn. There was nothing here for them. No grand historic structure or shaded ruin in which to picnic, just an impenetrable mass of vicious brambles, ivy, and ferocious jagged nettles. Not all of the house had succumbed to the fateful gunpowder cocktail. One wing had stood, albeit roofless, until as recently as the last war. A smoking Heinkel bomber had roared down, a victim of one of the many aerial duels in the dangerously clear skies of 1940. An iron bird smashing a precarious ruin to make a final nest of bricks for itself. Even this modern intruder hadn't been spared the attentions of a determined ivy. Severe lines of twisted and buckled aluminium were now a mass of tough green stalks. The birds and animals utilised this fallen warrior. Several generations of field mice lived in various nooks and crannies, while a flame-breasted family of robins had found refuge in the remains of the empty skull of the pilot. The man ceased writing and glanced across at the ancient book which lay open on the grass beside him. He tried to imagine this wild British jungle as the neat gardens portrayed on the yellowing page. Narrowing his eyes, he attempted to recreate the fine Tudor architecture. Nature had been the groundskeeper for far too long. The picture in the book might just as well have been some fairy tale. It bore no relation to reality. He stood up and ran his hand over the low, moss-covered stone set into the gatepost. His fingers tried to pick out the worn, carved letters. They were illegible, ending up as just so many bumps and dents in the green velvet surface. Instead, he read the inscription through as it was noted in the book he had acquired. Oh, to be at Windover, now the summer is here, to smell the new-mown clover, the hops to make the beer, to see the hunters riding after the swift-footed deer, to be close with the family and know that friends are near. The man closed the ancient tome and allowed himself a smile. He felt a sudden close affinity with that long-dead sentimentalist. Flicking open a businesslike jotter to a page marked prospective sites, he drew a line through the word Windhovers. Then, with a slight shrug of his young shoulders, he packed up the remains of his sandwiches into his rucksack. He took a farewell peek through the ivy-bound gates to where the summer house must have been, and trudged off in the direction of the nearby village. The kestrel soared into the sky and hovered on the gentle breeze, revelling in the sultry afternoon air. The single shaft of sunlight disappeared from the summer house instantly, as if it had been switched off. Phaeton's fiery chariot moved across the cobalt sky. It would forever return, as sure as the summer house would always be there to receive it.